Welcome to the TimCo Retail Manager course. This course focuses on real-world application development. In this video, we're going to be moving our source code over to Azure DevOps from GitHub. This is not a required step in order to use Azure DevOps. It's just that in this case, it's going to make our life a little easier since everything will be in the same spot. We'll also be tackling an outstanding issue in the code so you can see how to attach a work item to a commit message. For those of you who subscribe to my Patreon at the $5 per month level or higher, head over to get the source code for today's video. Now, if you're not familiar with this project, let me explain a little bit about it. We created the TimCo Retail Manager application to simulate the real world. Phase 1 started with a .NET Framework application and then upgraded the .NET Core in order to gain that experience and do an upgrade like that. We completed that phase in November. If you want to get up to speed quickly in that phase, I've got a link in the description to get that phase 1 course. Now we're in phase 2, where we're expanding upon the application and taking advantage of the development and deployment tools available to us. You see, I'm a firm believer in experience. Seeing someone do something is not the same as doing it yourself. So I always encourage people to follow along with me so you get the experience of doing the work. Then you can do something similar on your own to ensure you've grasped the concepts you're learning. This is how you grow as a C# developer. Okay, we're going to head over first to the browser. So here we are in Azure DevOps. We're logged into our TimCo Retail Manager repository or project on Azure DevOps. And let's go first to our repos where we have no code. Instead we have these options here. It says, hey, it's empty, let's add some code. In order to do that, we can clone from to your computer, we can push an existing repository from the command line, we can import our repository, or we can initialize with a README or git ignore. I love this page. This is one of my favorite pages on Azure DevOps. And the reason why is because it gives you the options that you have to get started. It doesn't lock you into one, and it doesn't assume things. So if this was a blank repository where we're starting off with no code, we're just getting started, what I would do is this last one where it says initialize with a README or, and actually in this case, and a git ignore file. So I'd select the git ignore file and have a README and initialize it. Don't do that though, since we already have source code. Now, if you did the weekly challenge, I believe it was last week or the week before, we talked about this. The idea that you can't have two different starting points. So if the repository starts with a README and git ignore file, that's the starting point, the point A. But if we already have source code with commits, that's a different starting point. So you can't have two starting points of the same journey. So what we need to do is not create the repository. We're going to push an existing repository from the command line. All right, so make sure you do that. Don't create your own. If you do, you'll have two different starting points, and that won't work. What you'll have to do is you'll have to create a new starting point for your code and lose a lot of those commits. That's probably the best thing to do at that point if you can't undo this. All right, so and we cover that in the weekly challenge. But in our case, we're going to push an existing repository from the command line. Really cool thing here, it gives us the commands that we need. All right, so that's the whole commands, everything we need. I'm going to hit copy. Now it's copied to my clipboard. Let's go over to Visual Studio, and this is our project. And if you right click on the solution and say open folder in File Explorer, it's going to pop up the location where you have your source code. That's a really handy shortcut that I use a lot. So in here, notice the .git folder indicates that this is the root folder for our repository. If I do a git bash here, it's going to open up the git command line at the bash. So I tend to do things on the command line, not through a user interface. In theory, you could use the interface like the Team Explorer. You could use that to do a lot of this work, not everything, but a lot of it. Or you could use a different tool, like a third-party tool like GitKraken, which is a good option for doing some GUI work. The problem with that is that if I teach one GUI, first of all, it will change quite quickly. And it may not be your preferred GUI. There may be a different one. There's a lot of different options out here. But they all point back to the same command line options. So if you learn these command line options, then you will have the foundational knowledge you need to use just about any GUI out there. So I tend to use the command line. I also find it much, much quicker to use the command line rather than trying to learn where everything is and what their buttons actually mean. Because different buttons mean different things to different people. For example, let's go back to Visual Studio here for a minute. If I were to go to the sync and push sync, that's going to do a pull and then a push. Well, I wouldn't necessarily do that on the command line. I would do a separate pull and push. So sometimes there's extra buttons or extra options or named a little bit different, and that can be a little confusing. So let's just use the command line. It will be simple, but I want to show you how to use it as well. So first of all, get remote. This tells you what your remotes are. In fact, if I do a get remote -v, that's going to give us all the information. Notice we have one remote called origin, and it has two different URLs here, which are the same URL. I think technically they can be different, but I don't typically see them as different or being different. So we have a fetch and a push. But this is a pointer to where my origin is located. Origin is located in GitHub on my personal GitHub repository called TimCo Retail Manager. Now we're going to change that over to Azure DevOps. To do that, let's clear the screen. First, we're going to do a git pull. And what that will do is make sure I have the latest source code from Git. All right, and I clear this. I already know that origin is my remote. So git remote rm for remove origin. Now if I do a get remote -v, there's nothing there. That means I've disconnected my Git repository from GitHub. Now I can add it to Azure DevOps. Now I didn't have to remove it before adding it to Azure DevOps. I could have had both if I really wanted to. In my case, there doesn't seem to be a reason to do both. Therefore, I will just have one. So I'm going to bring up Notepad here. I want to paste in what I copied. Oops. Let's go back and get that. There, it's copied. There we go. So this is what comes. Let's do the uncheck the word wrap. There's two commands here. So you paste this, what's going to happen is it's going to paste this command and run it, and then it will paste this, and then you have to hit enter to run it. I like to separate these out just so you can see what's happening. So first, get remote, which is the tool we've been using, and add. So instead of rm for remove, we have add. And then origin and the URL to our Git repository. All right, so there's our URL. All right. Now, if you don't already have permissions to that URL, then it's going to prompt you for those. But since my Git client does have those permissions already stored, it won't prompt me. So I'm going to add this at remote and call it origin. Now, if I had left the GitHub there and GitHub was called origin, I wouldn't add this and call it origin. I could call it something else like Azure DevOps or AD. Whatever you want to call it, you could give it that name instead of origin, and that's just fine. Now, the next step, git push, what that's going to do is push up all of our commits, our whole repository, to Azure DevOps. This -- all means all branches, and the -u says set origin as the upstream. So normally you would do a git push origin master to push the master branch up to origin. However, we can set an upstream, which is our kind of like our default. And then when I say git push, that's it, it's going to assume origin and the branch that we're on. So origin master. All right, so that's what this line does. So first, let's run this line, which just adds the remote. So let's paste this in and hit enter. And now if I clear the screen out and say git remote -v, you'll see that we have two, one origin for fetch and origin for push. And notice it's that new URL. And then we're going to run this second command, which is git push -u origin all. Shift insert. There we go. So git push -u origin all, pushing all the branches up to origin and setting origin also up as the upstream or default location for our pushes and pulls. Hit OK or enter, and it's going to push up all those branches. Notice there's two branches, authentication and also master. So now branch authentication is set to track remote branch authentication, and branch master is set to track remote branch master from origin. Now, if I do a git pull, which there shouldn't be anything new here because I just pushed, but if I do, notice I don't need to specify what branch because it assumes since you're on master, it's going to pull from origin master. That's the equivalent of saying git pull origin master. Same thing. Okay? So, with that being done, we have now moved over from GitHub to Azure DevOps. Let's see this on Azure DevOps itself. Let's close this out. If we just refresh this page, now you can see that we have all of our files are here. And if we go to commits, you'll see the list of commits to our repository, including a little bit of branching work right there. All right, so now we have all of our commit history on Azure DevOps, instead of on GitHub. Now, we didn't remove GitHub. GitHub is still there remotely. We just disconnected our machine from talking to GitHub. Now, it can be dangerous if you continue to commit to GitHub and then go, oh, oops, and start to work on Azure DevOps. That's going to cause a problem because you have work in one repository that's not in another, and they say they're on the same branch, but they're different commits, and that can cause some issues. So make sure that the easy way of doing this is to just get rid of GitHub, delete it. And so you go to github.com, you go to that branch, and you shut it down, remove it, and you're good to go. All right. So you only have one source of truth essentially. Okay. But just know that when we removed the upstream to GitHub, we did not remove GitHub itself. We just removed the link to it on this machine. So any other machines are still pointing to GitHub if we had cloned it from GitHub. So my advice is go to all your machines that are using this project, and now, first of all, delete the repositories. Make sure there's no unsaved source code, but delete the repositories, and then do a git clone, which you can go to Files here, go Clone, just copy this, and then come back to your bash wherever you want it to clone into. Now I've already got it here, but if this was not a repository directory currently, I would say git clone, and then I would do the. All right, I almost did it accidentally. Oops. So I'd do git clone, and then I'd paste in the URL that it gave us right here, and then hit enter, and it'd create that repository in a blank directory. So don't do this if the directory is not blank, if you already have it. Okay, so now we've moved over. We have our source code here, which is great. We can start working on this this CI/CD process soon. But first, what we're going to do is we're going to look at one bug we have on our list of things to do, and that is this one right here, which is fix security key in source code. So this is actually found by one of the viewers. They noticed that, hey, you fixed the security key in one part of your application, but not the other part. specifically not the token controller. So we have an open issue that's actually a pretty high priority. So, so I'd want to make sure this is taken care of. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to move that over to, yep, we're working on that. Okay, so now let's go to Visual Studio. And if we go to Team Explorer, there's not a lot of information here as far as our, let's go to changes. We can't connect to work items right now. And the reason why, we haven't connected to our Azure DevOps. Now this is a two-step process, which I found a little clunky. I kind of wish it was a little better, but I'm going to show you what the differences are. Okay, so if you go to Home, notice we're connected to Solution, and it only has these 6 options for your project. But if you hit the green Manage Connections option, you'll see that local Git repository, cool, that's where we're at right now, is the TimCo Retail Manager Git repository, which has just changed what the origin is, and that's okay. We also have the Azure DevOps, and the two are separated. Even though our remote Git is on Azure DevOps, the Azure DevOps is more than just a Git repository, and so I kind of separated those two out. So we're going to say connect, and it's going to search for my accounts. Notice I have 3 different ones, but inside dev.azure.com, I have I am Tim Corey, and inside there, down at the bottom, we have TimCo Retail Manager. I hit connect. All right, now notice that I don't have to hit clone for that, but notice I have now 8 options instead of the 6 we had before. And one of them is work items. Now it says showing 0 results because none of them are assigned to me. Now I think you can change my activity. There you go. So you can see all of them, which that works, and that shows you what I need to. Or what I can do is I can come over to here and I can say, instead of unassigned, assign it to Tim Corey. And now we can refresh this list. If we go assign to me, there's 1. And it's currently in the process of doing. Okay? So what we can do is we can actually complete this when we're working on it. So let's start by going back here to Home. And it does want us to clone that. So connecting to that repo did cause some squirrely problems with our Git repository. But the cool thing is, that's no big deal. Let's go ahead and hit clone. And I'm going to say that, you know what, let's change this to, let's go to my D drive. And I've got a location here called repos. I don't believe has a TimCo in it. Correct. I hit OK. And let's hit clone. It's got an empty folder. So inside of repos, we can make a new folder called TimCo Retail Manager. All right, there we go. Hit clone. And it's going to have this huge, I'm not sure why it's so big, sign in. And I'm going to sign in. And now it's going to pull down that repository. There we go. And now I'm currently open in the file view. Okay, notice the click switch views, which is this right here, to change from file view to solution view. The solution view is what you're used to when it comes to C# projects. Okay, so I changed to solution view. So now this is actually a new location. It's been recloned, but now we have access to, we need to reconnect to our TimCo Retail Manager. Double click there. There we go. And now we're fully connected. So like I said, it's a little quirky sometimes, but we can now work on our work items and associate them with commits. So let's go over to our API and do just a little bit of work. In our controllers, notice if we go back here, let's open this up, and it pops up the window, and it goes right to it. And it says we move the security key out of the part of the API, but failed to move it out of the token controller. All right. The more description you put, the easier it'll be to find the issue. Token controller. And then write down in here, my secret key, so do not tell. Okay. So that's what we need to replace with the pointer to the app settings.json, which is secrets:security key. So I believe we did that in our startup, where we looked for that right here. So let's just grab this. I copy it. Token controller, which the token controller does have the ability to pull from dependency injection. So you can pull from I configuration. So let's do that. Let's scroll off the page and then I'll fix it. So I configuration, control dot to use the Microsoft.extensions.configuration, call it config, and then control dot to create and initialize that field. Okay. Now what we can do is we can quick action refactor and we can wrap every parameter like so. And now it doesn't scroll off the page. So now down here, instead of my secret key is secret, so do not tell, we can take this out and we can paste in our value right there. Or what we can do is right above, we can say string key equals and paste in that value. This is underscore config. Okay, so now we're pasting that value in here, and we can take this out and paste in key. It's a little shorter now, and it's in two parts. We can also put our breakpoint right here and make sure you can see the key value that it gets back to make sure it's correct. Okay, so that should work for us to pull the value in and get the token correctly. Let's just make sure it does work by running our application. Oops, I just ran the UI library instead of right-click on solution and say we want to manage the startup. So set startup projects. All right, not a single project. We want multiple startup projects. We want the API to start, and we want the UI to start, and in that order. So we hit OK, and now we have that multiple startup project selection. We can hit start, and it's going to start the API first so that we have that running, and then what we'll do is it will start up our WPF application so we can log into it. All right, so there's the API, it's starting, and the WPF application is launched. We can log in, make sure it does log in. The target machine actively refused it. Okay, so what probably happened is we probably changed our URL for our API. In fact, I'm almost certain that's the case. If we set this as startup project, and then we change this from IIS Express over to that, I think that's going to change the URL. And then from there, we can check to make sure. So I'm going to run this first on its own and make sure the URL is, or what the URL is. Yep, it's 5001's the port. So it did change the port. And now I can change over, go to solution, set as startup project, and do multiple. And it's the API and the UI. But using Kestrel instead of IIS Express does change the port number, and therefore it will change whether or not I can access it. So I hit login now, and wait for it. There we go. We're logged in. And in fact, we can go to user management and see our current user, and so we can add a role to that user if we want to. But we're all good to go. We've actually logged in. It's acknowledged us. We can log out, and we're all set. Okay? So our application is working, and that didn't break anything that we know of. We don't have good unit testing in place. In fact, we have no unit testing in place, which means that I am doing these changes a little bit on the fly, which I'm not a big fan of. I like having that safety net of unit tests that pass or fail before I actually run the application. So I know, has the expected values changed in a way that's unexpected? Okay, so with that change in place, I can go over to my changes, and it says there are no work items linked to this commit. Let's hit the plus button. Let's enter the ID of the work item. I believe it's 14. So we've now said that this is associated with item number 14. How do I know it's 14? Well, work items number 14. Okay. We can also complete this work item if you wanted to. I just did that. Now it says done. Notice, and I go back to changes. I can say, okay, the change is the token controller. Let's go ahead and right-click and stage that. And we'll say that the fix is to use config for security key. Fixed a bug where the security key was hard-coded in the token controller. I'm going to commit staged, and I'm going to go to sync, and I can push those changes up since I know there's nothing to pull. All right, so now I am done my normal process, but let's go back to where we are in the work items. First of all, notice there's no 14 in the list anymore. If we go to boards, it's been moved over to done. We click on this, we will see that not only is it done, but over here, let's zoom in here, we can see that use secure or config for security key. Now, sound familiar? That's a commit message. We now know that this commit message is associated with this issue. If you click this link here, it'll actually take you to that commit message where all the work was done. So we now know where this commit was, what happened in this commit, and what issues it addressed. All right, so it's that linking back and forth so we know what's going on. So up here it says one work item. We can click that. Here's the associated work items with this commit. So it's that back and forth linking that just gives you a little better picture of what's going on and what happened in this commit or in this bug fix. Okay, so I want to show you that and show you how we're going to use those work items and associate them. I also want to point out that this bug that was noticed was pointed out by a viewer. So if you point out issues and they're pretty clear issues, that was a pretty clear defined issue, I can add it to the work item list, and then I'll even give you the commit or the ID number of what I added to the list, and then you can kind of track that through our videos and see, hey, there's my bug and there's the fix for it. Now, obviously not everything will make it to the list. If you say something like, do the entire application, but in Angular, that's not going to get a bug fix number, okay? But I will try and add these things to the list because it helps me keep track of what's going on and what needs to be addressed. All right, so that's where we're at. We now have one item moved over to the done category. In our next video, what we're going to do is actually address the setup continuous integration. So we're going to start by tackling just one of these tasks, which is to move the source code, which we already did that. Oops, check that box. Move the source code from GitHub to Azure DevOps. Cool. But then we're going to, we just did that one. We're going to come up here to move the API to Azure. So we're going to move the API over to Azure next. And once we do that, then we'll come back and start configuring our continuous integration pipeline and test it, and then work on deploying to Azure. We'll start probably with just moving the API to Azure directly, and then add our continuous integration and deployment to that location. Okay? So that's kind of the rough outline of where we're going next. We'll get this Azure DevOps stuff configured and working and automated. Okay? So that's what's coming up next. Thanks for watching. And as always, I am Tim Corey.